Andy, you're good to start.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This is our first official day of summer and it's 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am Annie Dorr. I am a regional manager in the Office of Employment and Training in our central region. And I'm joined today by my counterpart in the southern region, Bryan Ellis. And we are going to present information today on the supplemental state funding allocation for PY24, talk about the application procedures that were outlined in the WIOA notice on the supplemental funds. It's 23-NOT.07. That was sent out last Friday, June 14th by Laura Dom. Assuming you probably have seen it by now, but just wanted to highlight that for you. So we'll take a few minutes to walk through some slides and then we'll have some time at the end for any Q&A. And as we move along, if you have any questions, you can certainly put them in the chat and we'll address those as we go. Next slide, Antonio, please.
Sorry, I seem to have lost my controls. I apologize. Let me reshare this as presenter mode. All right, we're good to go. I apologize.
Thank you. All right, so I think most of you are probably already aware, but this is year 2 of the direct appropriation of state funds to support local workforce board training programs. There are a few changes we want to highlight for this year's funding as we go forward, but much remains the same around the initiative. So just as last year, this fiscal year 2025 budget includes $5 million in general revenue funds for LWIBs to support workforce services that are provided in coordination with WIOA programs that may require supplemental support. And that was determined by DCEO based on a needs-based assessment. As you can see up on the slide, there are 4 factors that were considered as part of the assessment. The WIOA program year 2024 funding levels or funding loss, the rural community need and support, and the communities with increased needs. And this year, a 4th factor around serving immigrants, migrants, and refugees. And we'll talk more about these factors in just a few minutes. We're excited about this opportunity for our 2nd year. It was kind of historic last year, and we want to carry the momentum into the current year. So next slide, Antonio, please. So we are fortunate, as I said, to have this flexible funding to support workforce initiatives. And as always, we are looking for high impact projects that demonstrate both the value of the supplemental funds as well as a need for continued funding going forward. So in thinking about that, the regional managers wanted to share just a few examples of some projects from the PY23 funding. So if you can switch slides, Antonio, please. So I'm going to highlight a few of these just again as examples of projects from last year that we thought were pretty outstanding. There were a lot of great projects and here are a few of them. So up in the northwest corner of the state in LWIA 4, they used supplemental funds in conjunction with their apprenticeship expansion funds to assist with broadband expansion in the Northwest region of Illinois. So in recognition of the need for broadband infrastructure, the LWIA worked with 2 area utility employers to develop registered apprenticeship programs. And they've begun classroom training in both of those initiatives. And in addition to that, they are working with 2 area vocational centers to using the virtual reality headsets kind of as career exploration and looking to those career centers kind of as a source of talent pipeline for youth. In LWIA 6, they conducted a back to school, back to work initiative where the supplemental funding supported a program that was focused on parents and caregivers that were returning to the workforce, kind of building on a successful series of workshops to offer technology skills, upskill training, and as well as a licensure and credential attainment. The workshops targeted parents and caregivers who maybe took a break from their careers and then experienced some struggles when attempting to return to the workforce. There was, recognition that even when someone possesses, previous education or work experience, the employment gap can be challenging to overcome. And this initiative was put in place to help overcome those gaps. The project served more than 30 participants and was recently recognized by the National Association of Counties with an achievement award based on the program's effectiveness. So congratulations and kudos to LWIA 6 on their national recognition of this really great program. In LWIA 19 in Decatur, they partnered with Archer Daniels Midland, an employer in the area, to complete, as well as with some alternative education students, to complete a 20-hour essential skills course that led to a paid work experience at ADM. And once the work experience was completed, students are evaluated and will be identified for post-secondary employment at ADM, being supported with on-the-job training funds through WIOA. And then in the southern area of the state, just wanted to highlight a program from LWIA 25 related to career pathways. So they used supplemental funds to expand access to career pathways in construction and manufacturing trades for 100 youth, including those in alternative high schools and credit recovery programs. The youth that they serve live in rural counties across five counties in southern Illinois where transportation is a big barrier. And the initiative aimed to promote career exploration events for youth who don't have concrete plans after high school. And at the center of the effort is supporting the school districts in the underserved communities by funding transportation costs to these events. Also, as a reminder, kind of related to that, barrier reduction is allowable with this funding. And again, just wanted to highlight these programs maybe as some food for thought. I know last year we talked about, exciting opportunities for the funding, but it's sort of that double-edged sword that the projects have to happen quickly. So these were, again, some great examples. I know there are others out there. But I'm going to turn it over to Bryan now, who will talk a little bit more about the allocation data factors that were used to determine the allocation. Bryan?
All right, thanks, Annie. So now we're going to, like Annie said, talk about the factors that were used to determine the total GRF funding allocations for each local area. Antonio, next slide, please. All right, so DCO completed a trend analysis of the WIOA Title 1B formula funding over the past 5 years, and we calculated the 5-year average for each LWIA's WIOA Title 1B grants based on the funding notices. So if the 5-year average of the WIOA Title 1B grants exceeded the program year 2024 grant, then the LWIO was awarded the difference between the 5-year average and the program year 2024 grant. So DCO will allocate approximately $571,000 under this data factor. Next slide. So the second factor that was used was rural community support. DCO used the data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural-Urban Continuum Classification Scheme that distinguishes metropolitan counties by the population size of their metro area and non-metropolitan counties by the degree of urbanization and adjacency to a metro area. DCEO allocated $1.5 million to LWIAs with rural and non-metropolitan areas, including 62 Illinois counties based on the proportionate share of that population. More information about that data factor can be found here at the link that's listed on the slide at the USDA.gov website. Next slide, please. So the third factor used was communities with increased needs. DCO will support local workforce innovation boards with increased poverty, unemployment, and educational attainment needs. DCO allocated approximately $1.9 million based on the LWIA's proportionate share of the WIOA program year 2024 adult funds. Next slide, please. So this fourth allocation factor is new this year for immigrants, migrants, and refugees. So the department will support local workforce innovation boards with an increased number of foreign-born workers, including immigrants, migrants, and refugees. DCO is going to allocate $1 million based on the LWIA's proportionate share of the foreign-born individuals reported in the American Community Survey data. So like I said, this is a new factor this year. For this bucket of funding, I believe 9 LWIAs received allocations. And so for those that did, we do anticipate some questions related to work authorizations. So before the presentation's over, we'll place a link in the chat for you to help verify, the status of work authorization through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website. In addition, we're going to also provide a document called WIOA Eligibility Guide for enrolling in services that could be helpful in determining what documents may be needed for each category of immigration status. Also, just a reminder, for those without authorization to work, they can still all participate in basic career services. And then finally, if you have questions as you move forward with some of these projects, please reach out to your OET regional manager. The funding allocations amounts for each of the local areas can be referenced in the funding notice, the 23-07. And again, if there's any questions or concerns about your area's allocation, please connect with your regional manager to discuss. Next slide, please. So just like the first round of funding, local workforce innovation boards must utilize the funds for one or more of the strategies outlined in Illinois' WIOA Unified State Workforce Plan. And those are highlighted here on this slide. The requests for funding need to be reasonable, necessary, and related to the purpose of the notice. And those include, these activities on the slide, such as increased access and outreach to advance equitable workforce practices, enhancing career pathways for youth to support careers in growing industries, expanded work-based learning for underinvested areas, increased access to workforce resources for justice-involved individuals, increasing workforce development for rural communities, integrated workforce programs and barrier reduction services to address homelessness, expanded employment and job training services for single parents, targeted initiatives that enable immigrants and refugees to access good jobs, expanding WIO Title II and Title I collaboration, and increasing flexibility to scale innovative initiatives and programs. Some more detail on each of these strategies can be found in the funding notice. So I'm going to go ahead and toss it back to Annie to talk about the funding application requirements. Annie?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So we'll talk a little bit about the application details. Again, this was attachment, the application itself is attachment B in the notice that was sent out last week. And this slide highlights a few items of note, but no real changes from what you're familiar with from last year. So Ellis can request the amount of funding listed, up to the amount of funding listed in the notice. And as Brian mentioned, the allowable costs must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable based on the activities in the scope. It is expected that the administrative costs, both direct and indirect, will represent a small portion of the budget. And then successful applicants should strive to keep the administrative costs to 10% or less of direct costs. And then again, as of last year, the funding for this program is for fiscal year 2025. And so the funds must be expended by June 30th of 2025. Next slide, please. So you should submit a completed application electronically to DCEO OET grants. You see the email address listed in the second bullet there. Applications should be submitted by July 15th of 2024. Applications that are submitted after that date may be considered based on the availability of funds. It's similar to last year. The application requirements include an executive summary, a budget summary, a narrative, your technical proposal, your implementation plan, and then any additional information or exhibits that you want to include. And you should also submit a completed budget using the State of Illinois Uniform Budget Template once DCO makes the funding commitment. Next slide, please. So in terms of the application reviews, there will be a team from the Office of Employment and Training that will review the applications based on the following criteria. So regional and local need, with a demonstration of a clear understanding of the local labor market needs and how the proposed program will address those needs. They'll be looking at project impact, so the potential for the program to effectively address workforce challenges along with the anticipated outcomes. Looking at feasibility, so the likelihood of a successful program implementation based on the applicant's capacity, their resources, and the timeline. We'll be looking at the partnerships and the strength and depth of those collaborations with relevant stakeholders, and also sustainability. So the plan for program continuation and sustainability after the funding period ends. Next slide. So in terms of outcomes, so measuring and tracking outcomes provides confirmation that the initiatives receiving the support are achieving their stated goals and that funding is directed to programs with the highest level of impact. in addition, I think wanted to highlight here that we did anticipate last year of having sort of an online reporting system in place, but as you all know, we had to utilize paper reporting. But this year, and this is one of the changes, is we are currently working with the staff at SIU to develop a reporting system this year. For those of you who are familiar with Apprenticeship Illinois platform, we're anticipating that this will be very similar in terms of functionality, but the data collected is going to be very similar to what you provided last year in your project work plans, but instead of putting it on your project work plans and emailing spreadsheets, you'll be entering it into Illinois WorkNet. And the goal here is to, make reporting and tracking of project outcomes easier. The conversations with SIU are ongoing, and so we anticipate sharing more information, once that is built and we can share more details with you, hoping that makes it easier for everyone. Again, I guess I would highlight, much the same as last year. But this is a change along with that fourth allocation factor or fourth bucket of funding related to the immigrants, migrants, and refugees. So I know that was kind of quick, but again, I know that you're all familiar, and I know many of you have already been thinking about projects for the upcoming year. I'd like to kind of open it up. I think Josh Coons is on the line. If you have anything to add, and then also would, ask if anyone wants to ask any questions. I can't see the chat. I don't know if there's anything in there, but let's see.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat so far.
Okay, great. Well, I guess, Antonio, if we could open it up and see if anyone has any questions about this. And I think we can probably stop sharing slides. Any questions or comments?
Hey, Annie, were you going to?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Amy. Go ahead.
Hi. Were you going to mention about for the migrant population? Are we? Can we provide training for those that are in process of getting their work authorization? Can you provide a little bit more guidelines on what we can do with the immigrant population?
Yeah, and I think, Amy, we had some questions too. I know Bryan shared in the chat a link where you can check the status of the work authorizations. I think there is some, concern around, providing training, providing employment without the work authorization. But I think our understanding is we're okay. Obviously, as Bryan mentioned, with those individual or with the career services, I still call them universal services sometimes, and then enrollment in training, I think as long as you have documentation or some support that shows that the authorization has been applied for. And I think we want to get a little bit more clarification on what that may look like, so we can certainly send some more information out about that. And I don't know, Amy, I know you're experienced with this, if you had any like words of wisdom to share or any specific concerns that you think we should address that from your experience.
Well, just that it is helpful while people are in the process to be able to provide some skills training, but some people may not, receive the work authorization. So you'd like to get on the forefront of of training while they're in the process. And so you don't have to just sit and wait. And so it's been helpful for us to be able to assist people with training while they've been in process.
Yes, thank you. I absolutely trying to address those needs while they are in process. And again, we will, attempt to send out some additional information related to that or around any requirements.
And we are able to use supportive services and barrier reduction, this funding for support service and barrier reduction funds as well, right?
Correct, yes.
And going back to immigrants, again, is that if they're in process, or is that
Yeah, so I think Amy, I think in terms of if they're in process, the communication that I have or we have is not real clear about the process or the timing. And so I don't know, I want to get a little bit more clarification and we can send that out. We are, kind of the understanding that you can provide those basic services. But in terms of supportive services and barrier reduction, they don't need to be WIOA eligible at this point. So it may be, a case-by-case basis that you're looking at in terms of what kind of support you're providing. Under the barrier reduction or supportive services.
okay? All right, so I should take down my hand.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat. The first one is from Matt Jones. With IWT projects, we are usually required to put the company's match into GRS, but last year that wasn't required for the supplemental funding. Do you anticipate us entering the match with this new grant?
And I don't know, I guess I would say, I don't know, Josh, or can you address that in terms of what's required?
I'd have to talk to John. I know you're on, but I don't think GRS is set up for match as of now. If that's something that we needed to capture, I think we could make that happen, but I don't know if that's a requirement.
Yeah, that's right, Josh.
Great,
Yeah,
thanks.
and I know, like, also, as it relates to, how you utilize these funds in conjunction with your regular, WIOA funds, those, the level of match requirements, technically isn't, it isn't there with these funds. But I definitely could understand if you want to keep it consistent so there isn't, confusion. But as it relates to the tracking of it, it may not be a line that we have coded in GRS. We could look to do that. And if not, I think you can just keep that number locally. But we'll follow up on our end.
Perfect. Our next question is from Kathy Cornelius. Is there a fillable attachment B application available? And there's a subsequent question asking if there was a Microsoft Word version of that application.
I think we could probably make that available and can send that out.
We can probably send that out with the recording.
Yeah.
All right, and Matt Jones said thank you, but I believe that's all the questions in the chat unless anybody would like to put some more in there.
Any other questions or?
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi.
Amy. Yeah.
Yeah, I have another one. On the new reporting system, is that going to be, is that like a will that just be sort of a summary roll-up of
Yeah.
numbers? It's not a, a case management system, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Correct. So it will be essentially very much the same as the reporting that you did on your work plans last year. It's just that instead of putting it on a spreadsheet and sending it in, you'll enter it into Illinois WorkNet. And the idea there is, just to so that we can better track and get some reporting, but what you will be reporting is the same.
Okay, so there's not like enrolling a customer profile or any of.
No, I know we're collecting, just as last year, some of the demographic and characteristics of some of the individuals that you serve, but there isn't an enrollment, there is no eligibility tied to this or anything like that.
And is there any specific, like, red flags of you can't spend money on X, Y, and Z? Is there anything?
You know, John, does anything come to mind about you can't? I mean, obviously there are rules around the funding, but does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think I go back to the slide where you don't have to, but I mean, I would point to the slide where it talks about reasonable and necessary and allocable to the priorities that are consistent with the state plan and your local plan, right? So we don't want to see projects that would get red flagged, right, are those that where there isn't a link to all of those priorities, or where if something could potentially be duplicative. And I know it's a hot button issue, but I know that system development is something that could potentially fall in that area. So if it's something that is like on WorkNet and like duplicates that, that's going to be something where we would probably ask some questions. I wouldn't say like it's a hard no out of the gate, but just know that you're going to have to provide additional information to demonstrate, look, this is why we need it. This is how it's connected. And that's really the intent of the application is, to make a direct connection in the quickest amount of time so you can get to the work. But if it looks like, well, there isn't a through line to your priority, and if there's a potential for duplication, then Annie and Brian and Kelly are going to have probably a lot of questions that they'll work with you through.
Great, thanks. That's helpful.
Other questions, comments? Going once? All right. Well, again, I know, regional managers have been in conversation with many of you over the last several months and throughout the process throughout the last year. I know you've all been thinking about projects. And if you have any questions as you're going through the notice and putting your applications together, or please reach out to your regional manager. We're happy to, spend some time talking through that with you and thinking through next steps. LaDonna, I see your question in the chat. When are applications due? So they're due July 15th, and they are, we are accepting applications after that based on, what funds are available after the due date. And that information is spelled out in a slide that we'll send out here shortly with the link on where to submit. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I we'll let you go and appreciate your time and attention today. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, the first official day of summer. So enjoy, and again, reach out with any questions or concerns as you go through. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.